Chunlang la janju badu dani chaps Taki jinzo je beso namji rola pinji sanji rubajo Sanji chudang sochi chunlang la janju badu dani chaps Taki jinzo je beso namji rola pinji sanji rubajo Sanji buzo sochi metta tang rira blinji nidi Sanji Jingdu Migdu Buai Indo Kananda Jinla Joba Jo Sanji Namji Zamba Dan Loyi Jida Jida Wa Chijundu Mundeba Chuji Kolo Kordo Zo. So, having begun with refuge and bodhichitta, and then made the short mandala offering prayer, which we make at the beginning of teachings, and also requested the wheel of Dharma to be turned. In this way we've completed the brief preliminary prayers that we do before teachings. So last night I discussed at the beginning of the teaching the obstacles that can affect us, that can actually make it difficult to receive the teaching properly. And so I explained what are called the 6 stains that will poison our approach to the teachings. And therefore one might ask, well, what is the proper way to receive the teachings? Actually, Lord Buddha explained this very briefly in the Gandharva Sutra, when he said that we should think of ourselves as like a sick person, and we should think of the teacher, who is like representing the Buddha at that time, as the doctor to whom we go for help. And then we should regard the teaching as the medicine that he prescribes, and then we should regard practicing this teaching after we received it as like following the doctor's instructions and taking the medicine in order to be cured. And of course it is valid to consider ourselves as sick people in need of the teaching, because right now, though we do possess the potential for enlightenment, we do possess the Buddha nature, it is covered over by the 2 obscurations of the afflictive emotions or disturbing emotions, and the obscuration of ignorance about reality. So due to those 2 obscurations, we do not realize our Buddha nature, and are consequently wandering like a sick person in samsara. So therefore, with that understanding, we will have a very practical approach to receiving the teachings. Just like when we're sick, we pay careful attention to the doctor's analysis of our condition and the prescription he makes for the medicine we should take. And then when we go home with the medicine, we actually take it until we're cured. So that is the way, the positive way we should see the situation when we're receiving the teachings. And then one might say, but after receiving the teachings, how do I make use of them? And the answer is that having heard the teachings, which is the first of the 3 steps to wisdom, then we must practice reflection on the teachings, which is the 2nd step, the step of reflecting or thinking over the teachings. And that means we need to study the teachings very intensively. And intensively means until we actually have memorized the key points, and therefore we've kind of thought about them with our reasoning, we've analyzed them from the point of view of our experience, and we know they're valid. And what is more, we have remembered them, so that we can then practice the instructions and reach the 3rd wisdom, which is the wisdom acquired through meditation. So that means that if we receive teachings, the best way to make use of them is to study them with great diligence and systematic effort afterwards. The great Sakyapandita says, by memorizing a verse of the Dharma every day, quite quickly we'll become learned. Just like if you have a pot, if you put a drop in again and again and again, quite quickly that pot will be full of water. So similarly, we need to study systematically. It is best if we can study the teachings every day alongside our meditation practice. Without that, we don't retain the teachings, and therefore they're of no use to us. It's like His Holiness said today, we should treat studying the teachings as another form of meditation. So when you receive the teachings, pay careful attention. Try to retain what is said so you can practice it later. Otherwise, you will not take away anything valuable from the teaching. There's a story from the early Kadampa tradition. One day, the great disciple of Atisha, Geshe Domten, was giving a Dharma discourse, and there were two old guys there, but they were not very attentive. Afterwards, as they were walking away, one said to the other, "What was he talking about?" And the other guy said, "Oh, he mentioned the name of an old fortress." That is the only thing they remembered from this wonderful Dharma discourse. In other words, the very last and least, most unimportant thing is what they remembered. They remembered, in other words, only in the kind of joke or the throwaway line that Dromten put in there. But the actual teachings, they didn't remember. I know if you're not used to studying, it is difficult to remember the Dharma when it's taught. And that is why the more you study, the more you remember the structure of the Dharma, the easier it is when you hear new Dharma, because you already have a kind of a skeleton of the teachings upon which you can place the new teachings that you hear. This is how the great masters became learned. So, after receiving teaching, please use it. And the first thing to do, as I say, is to remember the key points of the structure. Luckily, for instance, with the 7 points of mind training, that's very obvious. It's in 7 major points. Each has a particular heading. So we can start by memorizing this. And then you'll find it is easier to remember the teachings within each part. So that is a little bit about how to approach the teachings. Anyway, now tonight we've reached the 7th point, which is, according to the text, the 7th point presents mind training guidelines. Actually, the Tibetan word is labja. This means like precepts or precepts for training. So we could actually say the 7th point is additional advice for being successful in practicing Lojong. It's almost like everything that hasn't yet been said or covered, which will help us practice Lojong, will now be said in this last section. So, in Geshe Chekawa's root text, the first line for the 7th point is this: there is one way to do all practices. Actually, I should just mention, to make it easy for us to remember this 7th point, the lines are kind of dealing with topics that are numbered. So first we get a couple of topics relating to the number 1. Then we get some topics relating to the number 2. Then we get some topics relating to the number 3, as you'll see. So the first line says, there is one way to do all practices. So what does this mean? Shama Kunchi says, everything you do, including practices involving food, dressing, and so on, should benefit others. So what he means is that even small inconsequential things can become part of our practice, can become part of our spiritual path if we approach them with the correct intention. That's why I said, in terms of karma, there are virtuous actions, non-virtuous actions, and some actions which are neutral or indeterminate. But those neutral actions, if we approach them with a positive intention, they become positive. So this is especially true when we approach things with the bodhichitta motivation, to do this action for the benefit of all beings. So for instance, when it comes to food, we should think, I'm eating to sustain my body in order that I can accomplish the great benefit of others, both along the path to Buddhahood and finally as a Buddha. So that the act of eating food then is not for greed or self-satisfaction, but part of the actual training to become a Buddha. Similar, when we put on clothing, we can think, now if we're Vajrayana practitioners, we can think, this clothing I'm offering to my yidam, to my deity, so that instead of regarding the clothing with pride or something like that, we let go of that and offer it to our yidam. If we're not a Vajrayana practitioner, we can think, I'm dressing in order to look after my body, to protect it from cold and so on, in order that it can serve the benefit of others. Every action every neutral action we can transform in this way. For instance, when we go to sleep at night, we can think, tonight may I realize the illusory nature of all phenomena, in that they are just like dreams, and in this way may I accomplish the wisdom of emptiness. So those are just a couple of examples, but the main point is, try to do everything that you do naturally in the day with this intention of benefiting others. Now the second line of the root text says, confront all problems with one solution. Kunchi Yenlag explains, when faced with illness, demons, evil spirits, and malevolent influences, if you do not genuinely wish to apply mind training to a situation, even though you have been practicing mind training, then to overcome your resistance, you should think this. Most living beings are in the same boat, meaning they're in the same situation as me. May their faults dissolve into me. So in other words, the very resistance that you feel to use mind training when you're confronted with some challenge, you should use as like a way of drawing off the resistance that other people feel and the difficulties that other people have when they meet such challenges. So in this way, you use your very weakness and reluctance to practice Lojong as a way of practicing Lojong, because you think, may everybody's problems come into the one I have right now. So in that way, the one solution is, again, Lojong, especially in particular, taking the difficulties of others onto yourself. And that means, of course, then there's no situation we can't turn into the path. So those are the lines doing with ones. Now, twos. The root text says, in the beginning and in the end, there are two things to do. In the beginning and in the end, there are two things to do. Shama Kunchi Yenlag explains, at the start of the morning, think with great determination, today I shall not be separated from the two bodhicittas, the two types of mind training, conventional mind training, conventional bodhicitta, and ultimate bodhicitta. So this should remind us of the first of the 5 forces, the force of impetus, the way we strongly get going with the thought, may I never be separated from the two bodhicittas. But now, Geshe Cheka is saying, make this your first important thought of the day. As soon as you can after awakening, you can reconnect with the Lojong path by generating this intention, never to be separate throughout the day from the two bodhicittas. Because if we don't begin the day in such a strong way, before we even think of Dharma, many other neurotic thoughts, wandering thoughts, and so on, self-clinging, self-cherishing thoughts have started to kick in. And those the habits have already beginning to rule the day and shape the day. So it's very important that the day begins in the proper way with reconnecting with bodhicitta. It's like picking up the path once more and giving that direction and that shape to the day. It will be a much better and much more positive day if we do. And then in the evening, so now last thing in the day, in the evening, as you're about to go to sleep, consider the day's activities and make a list of all misdeeds that went against bodhicitta. Acknowledge them and make sure they will not happen again. So this is the other end. We begin properly and we end properly. And we end properly by, again, reconnecting with our aspiration, with our bodhicitta, by itemizing the important events of the day, whether they are just powerful mental states that we pass through, or whether they're forms of speech or actions. We make a list. And Geshe Langri Tampa, the early Kadampa master, used to do this with the practice of the 2 heaps of stones, 1 white stones, 1 black stones. And what he would do is he would think back to the beginning of the day, and for every virtuous deed and virtuous intention, he would place a white stone. For every negative thought, or emotion, or deed, he would place a black stone, so that he would then go through the day, go through the key events of the day, and at the end he could see what the shape of the day had been. So whatever was on the black pile, he would acknowledge, he would confess, in a sense, regret, and make a strong resolve not to repeat it the next day. Whatever was on the white pile, the virtuous deeds, he would rejoice in and dedicate the merit. So we don't need actually, of course, physically white stones or black stones or white beads and black beads or whatever to do this practice. But it is a wonderful practice if we can do this every night before going to sleep, to do this check on the day. We need kind of detachment and, to use His Holiness's word, professionalism to do this, so that we're really honest with ourselves. But even finding we've done bad things still actually is very helpful, because we can say, well, I made a mistake there. I forgot my bodhicitta intention. I'll try not to do that again. So the point is not to feel guilty, but to see, I fell short there, and I can certainly do better tomorrow. I can certainly improve tomorrow. And where there's been good deeds, we're thankful to the influence of the Lamas and 3 jewels that blessed us to do these, inspired us to do these, and we feel confident that we can do even more the next day. I've done this practice myself for 40 odd years since coming to Rinpoche taught it to me, and I can say that even if I've had a really lousy day, by doing this before I go to sleep, somehow the day starts to feel positive. At least I've done one good thing in the day, which is to examine myself before going to sleep. And no matter how lousy the day has been or how much I've forgotten, I feel reconnected with the path by doing this practice. So I really kind of recommend it very strongly. So beginning of the day, bodhichitta. May I never be separate from the two bodhicittas. End of the day, self-examination. And then, next line of the root text, patiently accept whichever of the two occurs. So what are these two? Shamarpa says, even if you have wealth, power, attendance and prosperity, do not be proud, but recognize them as like an illusion. So the first of the two, because it's a pair, is success. Things going well. When that happens, our self-clinging mind feels like vindicated, feels strengthened. I'm such a fine fellow. I really deserve all this. It's all my own creation, and it is going to last forever, because now I'm really king of the hill. So we feel at that time. But actually, all these things, success and wealth and so on, are just a temporary product of different causes and conditions. As Lord Buddha has said, the end of all coming together is parting. The end of all gaining is losing. So there's nothing fixed and definite and solid when things are going well. Like Jalse Tomizampo says in the 37 practices, you may have as much wealth as the son of King Vaishravana. Vaishravana is one of the wealth deities. But you should realize it's all like an illusion, and don't be kind of inflated by it. So whatever success there is, don't cling to it. If you do, you'll be brought down by it. Instead, recognize it as an illusion and retain your openness and flexibility of mind. You see, if we buy into success and think that's real and lasting, how will we handle the inevitable loss that will come? We'll be broken apart by it. We'll fall into despair or aggression. So we must be relaxed. And even if everything falls apart and you have sunk so low that water is all you have left, as a kind of Tibetan idiom for like if you've got nothing left but the water in the river, think of this also as an illusion and practice Tonglen. This too, this lack of success, this failure, is a product of cause and conditions coming together and producing a temporary effect. There is nothing any more real. It is also like the magical trick made by a conjurer. So you don't need to take that seriously either and react with despair and aggression because of it. Instead, when you're in this temporary state, be relaxed and take the sufferings of others, their failures, their difficulties into your own. So in this way, you will not be conquered by your temporary difficulties, but instead they'll become very strong part of bodhicitta, because you use them to, as it were, draw the sufferings of others away from them. So that is how we should be when we meet either of these two, success or failure. As Shamarpa ends, be neither arrogant when things are going well, nor despondent when things are not going well. The great English poet Rudyard Kipling, I suppose it's a name many of you are familiar with, in one of his greatest poems he said that we must meet the triumph and defeat as just like two imposters. And as they're just, both of them are false, both of them are fictions. And he said if you can do that, you'll be a real man. So there you are. If you want to be a real man, that's how you got to be. And a man's got to do what a man's got to do, of course. Mm. That's Lo Jong from Big John Wayne. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So next line of the root text, keep both as if your life depended on it. Keep both, what? So, Shamarpa Yenlag explains, guard both the general dharma pledges and the specific Lojong pledges as you guard your life. Well, that takes us back to the first line from point number 6, the so-called pledges of mind training. It's again, the vows, the general vows you've made in Dharma, the vows from individual liberation vow, bodhisattva vow, vajrayana vows, and the spirit of Lojong, because it doesn't have formal vows and pledges, there's a spirit to be kept. It's like keeping them is just as important as looking after your life. It may be in a way more important, because if we violate our vows, if we contradict the spirit of Lojong, then our future will be ruined. And not only our future, but all the promises we made when we made the bodhisattva vow to be the support and deliverance of all beings. Shantideva says in the Bodhichitta, having promised to liberate all beings, if I now give up my vow, it's like I've deceived all sentient beings. So we should therefore definitely guard the vows we make with utmost seriousness. There's nothing casual about vows. We make them invoking the presence of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas as our witness, and in the case of the Bodhisattva vow, we invite all sentient beings to come and benefit from our Bodhisattva vow. So we've promised to everybody that we will liberate them. So if we then give it up or break it, what a deceiver, what a liar, what a cheat we are. So that is why we must keep our vows so strenuously. It says, as if our life depended on it. Now, some lines with 3 things in them. Geshe Chekwa says, train in the 3 challenges. Actually, a Tibetan word means more like 3 difficulties, but okay. So what are they? Okay, the first, when negative emotions, the disturbing emotions or afflictive emotions, when negative emotions arise, the first challenge is to be mindful of them, is to be mindful or aware of them. The next is to keep them at bay, and the last is to finish them off. So, 3 difficulties, in the beginning, in the middle, and in the end. Yenlag continues, as for the first, you should recognize them as soon as they surface. But how can we do that? Right now our mind is very agitated. It's used to just chasing one object after another. And most of the time, it isn't even here. Most of the time, it's thinking about the past or anticipating the future. So it is not here, but here and now is exactly where a disturbing emotion arises. So we haven't any chance of recognizing disturbing emotions unless we have mindfulness and alertness or clear comprehension. That's why, again in Bodhisattva Charitara, Shantideva, the chapter 5 is called mindfulness and alertness, because he says that even though we may have made the bodhisattva vow, and even though we may be taking it seriously, unless we have mindfulness and clear comprehension, the thieves of the disturbing emotions will arise again in our mind and steal all the treasure of our virtue. So he says, therefore we must post the guard of mindfulness and alertness. Mindfulness means bringing the mind back to the present moment. It's a form of remembering. In fact, the Tibetan word drempa has that significance of both mindfulness and remembering. So we bring the mind back to the present moment. Wherever we are, whatever we're doing, our mind is aligned with the present moment. And the other mental factor that helps is clear comprehension or alertness. That has a kind of the scope of knowing what is arising around us so that we can see potential difficulties in the kind of environment in which we move in terms of disturbing objects and so on. So with that mindfulness, aided by alertness, we are grounded in the present moment, so that when a disturbing emotion arises, we can meet it. If we're not there, quickly the disturbing emotion will multiply. One disturbing emotion will engender another, and then engender another, and then we'll be acting under their influence, and it's like we're carried away on a flood of desire or aggression or whatever it is. But if we have mindfulness, we can meet it and turn it back. As Geshe Langri Tangpa says in the 8 verses of mind training, whichever of the activities I'm involved in, I should meet every disturbing emotion with mindfulness and thus turn it away. So that is the first thing, and that is why we need mindfulness. And by the way, this is the proper dharma teaching of mindfulness. This is not some business by which you can make lots of money and disembowel Buddhism. So the second challenge, Shamakunjana says, next use remedies to dispose of them. So when they have arisen, then you use a remedy. And we already discussed this a little bit yesterday. So that, for instance, if the disturbing emotion that arises, again, is predominantly desire, in other words, if it comes up again and again, then you know to use the remedy for that. If it's hatred that keeps coming up, you use the remedy for that, which is loving kindness. So that is the second challenge, to apply the appropriate remedy to the dominant disturbing emotion that is coming up in your mind. Of course, as I mentioned last night, the best remedy is realization of emptiness. But for beginners like ourselves, that is not so easy. So at first we probably need to rely upon those remedy meditations or antidote meditations. And then finally, the final challenge, as he said, was kind of making sure they don't arise again. So Kunjana says, apply whichever methods will keep them from arising in the future. So if it is, for instance, anger that is arising, even when you're even it's anger that's arising a lot, even when you're not faced by it, it signifies you need to do some work on dissolving that anger. So that would mean studying the consequences of anger, how destructive it is, so that you'll be very motivated to remove it, and then meditating on loving kindness and patience to dissolve that anger and aggression. So that is like after the immediate emergency has passed, then you work on the kind of weakness that it shows that you have in terms of tending to one disturbing emotion more than another. So those are three challenges. recognizing when they arise, turning them away when they have arisen, and making sure they don't arise again in the future. Then the next line from the root text says, adopt the three principal causes. Adopt the three principal causes. Konchog Yenlag explains, adopt these three: meeting with an excellent Lama, practicing the Dharma with a compliant mind. Actually, I prefer the word flexible for that. Practicing the Dharma with a flexible mind. And thirdly, gathering the appropriate conditions for practice. So, in other words, there are three principal causes of success in Dharma practice. The first one is that we're able to meet and rely upon an excellent Lama. And in terms of the Lojong, that means a Lama who is endowed with the Mahayana qualities. So it is a Lama who has made the Bodhisattva vow and has maintained the Bodhisattva vow, knows how to repair any damage to the Bodhisattva vow, and lives in the spirit of his or her Bodhisattva vow. It means a Lama who is learned in the Mahayana sutras and shastras. And in this case, it means somebody who is experienced in and master of the Lojong teaching. So that is the kind of Lama we need if we're to succeed in the mind training teachings. And then we rely upon this teacher, seeing him or her as like a Buddha. Because he's a Mahayana Lama, we rely on him as being like a Buddha. If it is our Vajrayana master, we have to see him as a Buddha, but in fact as being a Buddha. But in the Mahayana, the advice is to be resembling a Buddha. And then with that devotion and service to the Lama, we accomplish his instructions. So that is the first, meeting and relying upon an excellent Lama. The second is that from our side, we practice the Dharma with a flexible mind. Flexible means one that is not rigid, but is able to handle the difficulties of learning and meditating on the Dharma without giving in to kind of aggression or despair. So it is a flexible mind that we need. And finally, we need to, as it says, gather up conditions for practice. So that means that we have to check our life, the circumstances of our life, to see if they do provide the space for Dharma study and practice. Shamarpa Rinpoche said that this was, for monks for instance, the appropriate conditions are provided by the Vinaya, the Dulwa, the rules of monastic discipline, because they create a calm and serious environment in which one can engage in study and meditation. We lay people need to find our appropriate conditions in a way that we can fit into our lifestyle. But nowadays, I think, even in the modern world, because of so many kind of technologies and so on and so forth, it isn't impossible. We can actually find time, most of us can find time for daily practice and study. But for that we must have, to be able to do that properly, we must have, when we're not practicing formally, we must have a kind of quite quiet and sober, a serious kind of lifestyle. It is not possible to go from kind of being a wild party animal to practicing the Lojong all that easily. Although if you can, I offer you my maximum respect. You know, again, as one of my heroes said, a man's got to know his limitations. That was actually Clint Eastwood, a great master of meditation. And I certainly know mine. So, now, next line of the root text. Unfailingly cultivate 3 things. So what are the 3? Shamarpa says, unfailingly observe devotion, mind training, and the rules of moral conduct, including the most minor ones. So, devotion, the Tibetan word for devotion, mugu, means like appreciation and respect. So what are the objects? Well, they're the Lama, of course, from whom we receive instruction, as we just mentioned, the 3 jewels, and particularly, in this case, the Dharma itself. We have appreciation and respect for the qualities and blessings that these bestow upon us. If there isn't this devotion from our side, there is no openness. If we think we are the equal of our Lama, if we think we have no need for the blessing of the 3 jewels, and if we think there's nothing really important about the teaching, we have no openness. So how can any of those things influence or change us? We're blocked. So devotion is, from our side, the necessary openness. And then mind training. Well, no need to say anything further about mind training here. We know, we've heard so much about it. So it is the second thing to cultivate. And thirdly, he said the rules of moral conduct. And so, again, as I just mentioned, in the Dharma, there are 2 basic lifestyles. That for renunciates, monks and nuns, who have gone forth into the homeless life, which is the proper definition of monasticism in Buddhism, and householders like ourselves, who remain at home with all the responsibilities of work and families and so on. But we each have our moral rules provided for us initially in the pratimoksha, the individual liberation vow. And so morality is like the kind of basis upon which then we can train in the Lojong. Without it, our mind is not supple enough for the practice. So we mustn't think we can skip it. And that's why Konchog says, including the most minor ones. Now, one might say, well, even the monks, even the monastic sangha in Mahayana cultures don't follow every single one of the minor rules with their total kind of intensity. That's true. But the point is here, don't kind of feel, we shouldn't feel that we can just arrogantly dispense with the need for this moral training. We should take it very seriously, whether we are monks following the conduct for monks or lay people following the conduct for lay people. And there's a point there also. Sometimes lay practitioners, householder practitioners, feel that they should behave as monastics. But that is not really appropriate. Without having received the proper ordination, you cannot be as a monastic. So learn how to be a good Buddhist householder and keep that as your moral conduct, and it will serve you well. And then the next line from the root text, Geshe Chekwa says, make sure you have the inseparable 3. Oh, that sounds like a girl singing group. The inseparable 3. Make sure you have the inseparable 3. So, what is that? Yenlag's explanation is very simple. It means never separate the body, speech, and mind from virtue. So, always connect what you're doing physically, what you're speaking, what you're expressing verbally, and what you're thinking with virtue. So, for instance, Kamachame, the great Kajapa master Kamachame said, for body, practice prostrations and circumambulations. In that way you're using the body for virtue. He said, with the speech, recite prayers, sutras, take refuge, and so on and so forth. And with the mind, meditate bodhichitta. So this is just an example. We can find many different Dharma teachings which we can apply through our body, through our speech, and through our mind, so that we kind of harmonize every part of our being with the Dharma. Now some may say, but surely Dharma is just a thing of the mind. What do I need to worry about speech and body? And it's true, the essence of Dharma is the Buddha nature mind. But we are more than just the mind at this time. We're embodied and we communicate. So if we don't align these parts of our being with the Dharma, the mind will also not enter the Dharma. So we bring every part of our life into the Dharma, and nothing is excluded, which otherwise will actually hold us back. So it is not that every moment of the day we need to be prostrating or circumambulating, or every moment of the day we need to be praying or reciting the texts. But if we make the regular habit of doing these things, then our mind will easily settle with the Dharma. So that is the advice, to use body and speech to support the mind training. And then next line of root text, Geshe Chekwa says, train impartially in every instance. Once deep and inclusive training has taken place, love everyone. So Kunji Yenlag's explanation is almost as short as the root text. He says, train wholeheartedly, not just rhetorically, and it's not just in saying things, not just speech. Train here, deeply. Don't just mouth it. Your Dharma shouldn't be just like pious words. It has to be taken down to the heart. Encompass all living beings in your training. So the deep and inclusive training, his meaning, it shouldn't remain just an intellectual idea or a pious wish, but it's something that really has to happen in your heart. Until it's like the heart is opened by Lojong practice, you're not in any way really a Lojong practitioner. So it must be deep training and inclusive, be able to bring the practice into every situation. And impartial again means, as we've touched on in earlier lines, you shouldn't think you can only practice when things are good and not when things are bad. Or you shouldn't think you can only generate love to pleasant people and not to bad people. You have to be able to practice it, as I said last night, in kind of 360-degree way. So in that way, when you've trained deeply and something has really happened in your heart, then you can really extend love to all beings, and as you can cherish everybody. And then Geshe Chekwa says, always practice with special cases. So in a way it's a follow-up from the previous line, how to really extend one's practice of loving kindness and compassion and send and taking in all directions, when just because of karma there'll be some people you have a kind of initial feeling of difference with, or a feeling of fear of, or aggression towards. It's inevitable because we carry so many imprints from past lives, from this life also. So there will be difficult cases, special cases. This is what Shamarpa Kunchi Yenlag says. Your companions and rivals, those far removed who have not harmed you, and those close by who have, those whom you instinctively dislike because of karma, and so on, make these kind of difficult cases the special object of your practice. So, companions and rivals means like those we feel some kind of, competitiveness with, whether it's in worldly matters or even in terms of dharma status. You know, they kind of challenge us, and we feel a need to kind of fight with them and contend with them, succeed over them, triumph over them. So, when such feelings arise towards such people, then we must really see they definitely need me to make a lot of effort in sending and taking towards them, so that if I can extend send and taking to them, I've really kind of like dissolved a knot. A big knot inside of me has been dissolved, and all the energy that's locked up in that knot now flows into my practice, whereas otherwise it was dissipated. Now my practice becomes much stronger because I'm able to incorporate this person into it, into my sending and taking. And so similarly with those far removed who have not harmed you, there may be people you just don't bother with because you've had nothing to do with them or they're so far away. Well, if you notice there are people who, in a way, outside of your radar, whom you're not incorporating into the practice, you have to make a special effort, because they represent like a boundary, and you can't have any boundaries. There can't be any place where your loving kindness, compassion, bodhichitta stops, because loving kindness, compassion have to be limitless, and bodhichitta has to be limitless. It's not, bodhichitta is when you generate the wish to become a Buddha, it's not for all beings up to the end of the city limits of Delhi, or all citizens of the European Union but nobody beyond, or all citizens of planet Earth. It's all sentient beings. So where you notice, in a way, there's a kind of, in your mind, a boundary to your practice, you have to go beyond it to include all those beings, all those limitless beings. And similar with those you feel an instinctive dislike to, you should recognize that and make them, again, a special object of your practice. So in this way, the special cases, the difficult cases, give your practice enormous power, because, as I say, you're dissolving a knot, or a kind of cutting through a limitation you have. In the next line of the root text, do not concern yourself with external circumstances. Shamarpa says, do not concern yourself with whether or not there is an abundance of food or clothing, whether or not there is suffering, whether your lodgings are pleasant or unpleasant, whether your health is good or bad, and so forth. In other words, you just have to continue on. Rinpoche said this means you have to continue on with your practice no matter what the circumstances. And you see, the Lojong is the ideal practice for this. Okay, so things are difficult. Take all the difficulties of other people into yourself. Okay, so where you're staying, maybe you think it's not so good. You can use that to take the sufferings of other people in a similar situation into your situation. Even right down to sickness. There are some practices you cannot do. Ritual practices maybe, things like that, yogas, you cannot do if you're physically sick. But Lojong you can always do, right up, as we saw, to the point of dying. So there is nothing that the Lojong practice cannot handle. That is the point. So that's why we don't need to worry about external circumstances. One or two of my lamas have talked to me about when they went back to Tibet and talked with people who were put in the prisons and so on and so forth, and even some very great lamas were put in prison. I mean, many were actually killed, of course. in the early 60s in Tibet. But even those who weren't had many great difficulties. Often they didn't have even their rosary, they didn't have any texts, but they all found a way to practice. And for many it was actually Lojong practice that was their sustaining practice during that time, because you can practice Lojong no matter what. And then the root text says, put the most important things into practice now. So this is about really weighing up what is important. Weighing up what is important. Why? Well, because who knows how long we have. So we must, to go back to that first of all teachings, utilize our precious human birth the best way. And that means practice that which is most serious, which is most important. So Shamarpa says, thus far, taking rebirth in samsara has been senseless. It sure has. My mind stream has been in samsara since beginningless time, and what do I have to show for it? Well, not much. Not really very much. In fact, absolutely nothing at all. I'm still an idiot. I'm still beset by the disturbing emotions. I'm far from any spiritual qualities. I've tried everything. I've been everywhere an infinite number of times. I've tried every single thing, but it's not brought about happiness, just produced more confusion and suffering. So now is the time to accomplish the most important thing. Now is the time to finally get serious. And what are the most important things? These are the dharma, which is more important than any goals related to this lifetime. All the things of this life are transitory, they're impermanent, no matter what they are. Money, status, possessions, all are impermanent. I'll have to leave them behind. So, in fact, I'm not even a Dharma practitioner until I understand this, until I understand that Dharma is more important than anything I can accumulate in this lifetime. And then, when it comes to practicing Dharma, what is most important? Actual meditation practice, which is more important than learning. Accomplishment is more practice than learning. That is true. But of course, you need to learn, because you cannot practice unless you are learned. Even the great Gampopa said, practicing without first knowing the instructions of the Dharma will at best lead to rebirth as an animal. And that was a Kajapa who said it. So, although this is really important that we know that practicing is more important than learning, whoever tries to practice without being learned is like a blind man. So that we really need to understand. And then, in terms of practices, it is bodhichitta which is more important than any other spiritual practice. So now we have it. That's the key thing, to practice bodhichitta. Because without bodhicitta there can be no Buddhahood. But if we practice the true bodhicittas, there will be Buddhahood. Because through those we gather the true accumulations of merit and transcendental wisdom, through which the bodies of a Buddha, the four kayas, arise. So that is why bodhicitta is the key thing. As he says, therefore put this into practice. And then the next line from the root text says, do not misconstrue. Maybe make it simpler. Do not make mistakes. Do not make mistakes. In other words, he's going to explain, Yenlag is going to explain to us ways in which we can misunderstand and misapply the Dharma because of self-clinging. So first, there's misguided patience or mistaken patience. Mistaken patience is being unable to bear suffering connected with Dharma practice, but able to bear everyday worldly suffering. You know, for the sake of gathering money or property or impressing somebody, there's so many difficulties we don't mind bearing. Or look at the difficulties people put in the gym just to keep this body, which will fall apart very quickly anyway, trim and buff, is it? You call it? So many difficulties. Just imagine if they put that kind of intensity into Dharma practice. So, but Dharma practice, 5 minutes study, it's too much. 30 minutes practice, my legs are killing me. No, I can't be doing that. I've got many other more important things to do. So patience should be applied in the Dharma practice. That's most important. Mistaken resolve, the second. Mistaken resolve is lacking the aspiration to practice the Dharma, but aspiring to carry out activities connected to this life. So it's like ambition. We have many great dreams for this life. We're going to do this, we're going to be successful in that, we're going to have that kind of property, we're going to achieve all that. But we don't have any big aspiration in Dharma. But we should have the big aspiration, the bodhisattva aspiration, like the aspiration spelt out in Samantabhadra's prayer. There's nothing wrong with having big aspirations, just let them be the proper ones. Finally, biggest of all, to become a Buddha for the sake of all beings. So make that your resolve, not to be number one on your street, or most handsome person, or most powerful, or most influential person. Make it most enlightened person. And then misguided taste or enjoyment, maybe. Mistaken taste is not having a taste for the Dharma, but having a taste for the things of this world. It's like we're settling for something, we're selling out for something low. That's the point. There's the ultimate bliss of enlightenment and the happiness and joy that comes along the path through practicing the Dharma sincerely. But we'd rather ignore those and sell out for very low and temporary kind of thrills, kicks. So we must so the real happiness and ultimate happiness we abandon. For cheap, it's like we traded a real jewel, the bliss that can arise from Dharma, for a kind of glass jewel, for an imitation jewel. Mistaken compassion. Mistaken compassion is not practicing compassion towards wrongdoers, but instead developing compassion for those who practice austerities in the name of the Dharma. So, good example that Rinpoche mentioned is like Jessa Milarepa's sister. I think you probably all know the story. When Jessa Milarepa had entered into retreat, because of his need to practice with great seriousness and discipline, he didn't mind undergoing austerities. So, for instance, he went eating very, very tiny amounts of food. His clothing kind of fell to pieces. So when his sister Peta came to see him, he looked like a kind of green ghoul, a green ghost, and he had no clothes. And so she felt very sorry for him. That is a mistaken compassion, because she should have rejoiced in his practice. Milarepa didn't need her pity or compassion at that time. So that's a mistaken object of compassion. So thinking, those poor people practicing Dharma, it's so hard for them. Instead, as he says, you should have compassion for those who are creating suffering for themselves, which are those who do harm. Those who are practicing Dharma well, they have no need, except in the general sense that one should have compassion for all beings, of course, but they should not be special objects of your compassion, because they're doing very well, thank you. Mistaken caring is not encouraging those who depend on us to engage in dharma practice, but encouraging them to do worldly activities. So, what will be better for those who we look after? Maybe our children, or maybe friends or relatives. What will be better? We encourage them to be worldly success, or encourage them to be successful in dharma? Of course, the second. Worldly success lasts at best for one life. Dharma success is for future lives, up to and including Buddhahood. So it's obviously more important. Of course, there's nothing wrong with helping our children or those who are responsible to have a good life that will sustain Dharma practice. But if we encourage them away from Dharma practice in one way or another, and substitute for that the importance of worldly success, we've harmed them. That is why, incidentally, although in Dharma we talk very much about the importance of the love that parents have for us, love can sometimes be wrong, in the sense that it's sometimes out of love that parents encourage their children in wrong directions. So love too is according to circumstance, whether it's healthy or not. Misguided or mistaken rejoicing is not being delighted when others find happiness and joy, but rejoicing when enemies experience suffering. So that is, we should, of course, rejoice in happiness that others find and their joy. If we enjoy their suffering, we actually, of course, are partaking in bad karma. We've generated a very negative mind. That is like the American novelist Gore Vidal, who's not the most pleasant person maybe, because he said whenever any of his rival novelists had a good review for their books, a little part of him died. So remember Gore Vidal in your next practice. And then this is it. Having rejected these 6 mistaken points, practice the 6 correct ones, which are, of course, the opposite ways to be. Then, next line. Do not be inconsistent. Do not be inconsistent. Things like, don't fluctuate in your practice. So, Shamarpa says, when conviction or certainty, I prefer, when certainty in the Dharma fails to develop, is when you don't develop kind of real confidence, a certainty in the truth of the Dharma and its effectiveness, sometimes you will practice and sometimes you will not. Well, in that way, of course, you'll never develop certainty if you're sometimes on, sometimes off. Because that's like putting a pan of milk on the stove, turning up the gas or electricity, and then after a minute turning it off. And then after another minute turning it on. The milk will never come to boil that way. Rather, it must be heat must be applied consistently till it boils. Similarly with our Dharma practice. So Konchog says, abandoning this pattern uninterruptedly and one-pointedly engage in mind training. So we can remember in this case the story of Asanga. Many of you will know the great philosopher Asanga, great practitioner Asanga. His yidam was Maitreya, the Bodhisattva Maitreya. So he went into deep retreat doing the sadhana of Maitreya. And then after a few years of the practice, he was feeling very discouraged because he didn't get any realization. He didn't have any vision of Maitreya. So he came out of the cave, and then he saw a man who was rubbing a mountain with a feather. And he said, well, why are you doing that? That's crazy. He said, the man said, gradually I will wear it down. So then Asanga thought, he's got such persistence, such consistency, I must return to my practice. So he did. And then, after 12 years, he still was not developing realization. He'd still not seen Maitreya. So then he came out of the cave, and then he saw a dog in front of his cave, which was a terrible wound on its back. And so and in the wound there were worms. So he wanted to help the dog, and he wanted to take the worms out, but he thought, if I take the worms out by my hand, I might kill them. So he bent down to lick the worms, to take the worms out with his tongue. And as he did that, then the dog disappeared, and there was Maitreya. And Maitreya said, I've been with you all the time, but you didn't see me. But now, thanks to your devoted effort and persistence for 12 long years, now you finally will see me. So we should be like Asanga in that way, not be inconsistent. Then the root text says, practice decisively. Konchog explains, once your mind is completely surrendered to mind training, make it your only practice. He means, don't, as we say in English, chop and change. Don't sometimes practice it, sometimes change to something else when you get bored, then try something else. But take the practice seriously and follow it through till you gain realization. Make it your only practice. Now, what about if we're already practicing something very seriously? Another Dharma cycle, maybe practicing the Kajupa Mahamudra or some Yidam practice or so on. Well, in that case, of course, if we're seriously engaged in that, we shouldn't drop it. And therefore, we have to understand that we can utilize the Lojong, the teachings of the Lojong, as a support for our main practice. So to say this, that practice decisively, doesn't mean replace what you're doing. If you have a working Dharma practice now, you don't need to replace it with the Lojong, but rather you should take these teachings and use them to, as I say, support your main practice. But if Lojong is your main practice, keep it that way. Don't chop and change. One of the big obstacles that we have is being settled and determined in our practice. And therefore, often it's the case that when the initial excitement of a practice wears off, we're tempted to give up, to think, oh, it's not working, I must change to another practice. But actually, it's when the initial excitement wears off that a practice really starts to work, because then it really starts to touch our deep resistances, the strong imprints. So that is why we are consistent and practice decisively in whatever correct Dharma practice we have. Then Geshe Chekwa says, free yourself by examining and analyzing. And this means assess which disturbing emotion dominates your mind stream and make an earnest effort to eliminate it. Well, that has been covered really in earlier points. And then, oh dear, Geshe Chekwa says, do not make a habit of showing off. Okay. What? Like what? Okay. Well, not your latest designer suit or your car. He says, do not boast about being kind to someone. Okay, it's Buddhist boasting. Do not boast about being kind to someone, or practicing the Dharma for a long time, or being a scholar or renunciate, or so on, like a venerable monk. Why? Well, because in that case, we are taking whatever goodness there is in our connection with Dharma and spending it on something unworthy. So the Dharma is not training us anymore. We're kind of cashing in the Dharma. We're taking the Dharma to the bank and cashing it in for worldly status. And that takes us back to that earlier line about change your inclination and be natural. In other words, keep quiet about your Dharma practices. keep quiet, keep them kind of in a way somewhat secret, be somewhat reticent about them. And particularly, of course, your dharma experiences. I mean, if you hang out around the cafes in Bodha, after half an hour you've heard far too much about people's dharma experiences, and which Rinpoche they're very anxious to get up close and personal with. So, enough of that already. Next line. Do not be irritable. Continue, let's get straight to the point. Do not become irritated if, for example, someone offends you in public. I think I mentioned what Tommy Zampo says in the 37 practices. If someone insults you, and this then goes around the whole world and is accepted as the truth, nevertheless bow your head to this person as your teacher. Because, why? Because they're giving you an opportunity to develop patience. Plus also, they're giving us an opportunity to check. Do I have this fault? Maybe I do have this fault. Okay, they're pointing it out of aggression, but I should check myself to see to what extent this criticism is true. There's a very famous story about the great Zapatra Rinpoche. Zapatra used to wander around in Tibet. He didn't stay in his monastery, although he was a tulku. He wandered in eastern Tibet and met all kinds of people. And one time he came to a cave where a hermit was dwelling, Gomchen, great meditator. And anyway, maybe Patra Rinpoche saw something about this Gomchen, so he said to him, the Gomchen, the great meditator, "Oh, what is the main object of your practice, O Gomchen?" And so the guy said, "I'm meditating right now on the perfection of patience." So then Patra Rinpoche said, "Aha, that's good for a fraud like you." And then, of course, the meditator was very, very angry. So Patra Rinpoche said, "Look at your mind right now." So he didn't know this teaching. And then Geshe Chekwa says, "Do not be capricious," which doesn't mean don't like the island of Capri. It means do not be temperamental. Do not be temperamental. Kunchi Yenlag explains, avoid openly expressing your approval or disapproval of every little thing which occurs. It's again back to that flexibility and openness of mind. Continually commenting on and criticizing the smallest thing makes your mind very tight. So how can there be openness and compassion in that kind of mind? So you have to let go many things. It's maybe like we should say for us Westerners, be in India and be relaxed. And then Geshe Chekwa says finally, do not crave thanks. Kunchi Yenlag explains, do not crave the prestige of being thanked if, for instance, you have helped others. Well, because in that way again, you may have done a good deed, but you've poisoned it. If you do good things in this way, you're just like, it's just an economic deal. I'll scratch your back if you scratch mine. I'll do something good for you and you call me a nice person. How is that loving kindness, compassion and bodhichitta? It's not. It's just self-clinging and self-cherishing. You're just investing good deeds for a return from other people. So you give away the goodness. You give it away entirely. That is the essence of practicing the 6 perfections, that we do it without any thought of giver, recipient and object of giving. So do not expect any thanks. So that takes us to the end of the 7th point, and now we have just the colophon, the end part of the whole text. So first, the root text says, a little kind of couple of verses, belonging to the transmission of Selingpa, that's Dhammakirti from the Golden Island. Belonging to the transmission of Selingpa, this is the essence of the elixir of pith instructions, the menak, the oral instructions that came from Dhammakirti to Atisha. When the 5 degenerations are gaining ground, this teaching transforms them into the path of awakening. So Kunjunak explains it a little bit. This Lojong teaching is like a magic potion, an elixir of Dharma, which, like a kind of alchemical substance, can transform the 5 degenerations that afflict us. The 5 degenerations are of time, that is, that things are getting worse and worse, and don't forget this is written in the 12th century, and things have got considerably worse since then. Sentient beings are becoming wilder. Lifespan is degenerating. Maybe this means like quality of life, of course. Emotional afflictions are getting stronger, and views are getting worse. Views like materialism and theism are getting stronger and stronger. All these 5 degenerations, the afflictors, can be turned into the path, because this teaching is so powerful. It's like, even in this dark age, this new dark age that we have now, this Lojong can work and can transform all bad circumstances into the path. So, Geshe Chekawa continues. When karmic tendencies due to past training were rekindled, so I had a previous connection with this practice from past lives, he said, I was so deeply inspired that it led me to request, with utter disregard for suffering and defamation, the oral instructions which subdue self-clinging. So it's that story I mentioned, how he saw a verse from Langri Tampa about the Lojong, and therefore was inspired to seek this teaching. Were I to die this instant, I would have no regret. Because, as Geshe Chekawa was saying, he has really given his whole life to practice this Lojong, and therefore he has nothing to regret. He's used his life properly. And Rinpoche said that actually Geshe Chekawa achieved the first noble bhumi through this practice alone. So Geshe Chekawa, spiritual friend Chekawa, Geshe Chekawa, expresses his absolute confidence in this Dharma teaching with these words. If there's just one kind of Dharma to be practiced, it should be this. This concise explanation of the practice was composed by the 5th Shamarpa. So it's a 5th Shamarpa based his commentary upon the earlier commentary written by Nuchu Tomizampo, author of the 37 Practices. Because I received the teaching transmission from this from Shaman Rinpoche himself, then Khenpola asked me if I would share it with people here, so I'm very happy I've been able to do so right now. So I read every word of the text, and also then gave some explanation. So I consider this must be the actual transmission of the text as Rinpoche passed it on. So why don't we sit for a minute, and then if there are 3 questions, we can finish with them. Padan sawe lama rinpoche dagi chiwa peme dinju ne kadin chimbu gune jezende kusundu chinadu sadhu som. Sunam de Tamshi Zigbani to Bini Pendanam Chiganaji Barlandru Bay Sipi Solandro Androage. Okay. Okay. There must be some horrible beings you want to subdue. That's why you're doing the averting ritual.
My question is about the meditation in the dead time. In what you told the Tonglen meditation we can do during the die.
Yes,
we
yes.
die, and but I think before about them during dying, which kind of meditation we can do, but all maybe the time of dying is not so quiet, maybe not all condition very nice, so we can some concentrate of some meditation. But this I now get new information about the practice we can do in that time. Can you please explain more about them? And which kind other meditation or only this Tonglen?
Sorry?
During that time, we die. So.
Well, of course in general, it is best that what meditation we use at death time, we already are very used to in our life. Because, as you say, at death, things might be a little chaotic. Maybe noisy, true, or maybe a lot of people in the room, or things going on. So if you try to do something you're not used to doing, you're not familiar with, it will probably just add to the confusion. So it is first principle is to rely upon a practice you can do quite easily, because it's very familiar. It's like your mind has already been along this path a number of times. So here in the Lojong, it's saying the two main practices you did during your life, if you're a Lojong person, are sending and taking, and resting in the emptiness of mind. So without any complicated ritual, you can do those. So for instance, if it is chaotic and noisy in the room, you can still do the sending and taking, because as long as you're breathing, you can still concentrate on the sending and taking. Even if, for instance, it's too noisy or chaotic to rest in the nature of mind at all, you can do the sending and taking. So that's why the Lojong instruction for dying is quite easy. I mean, it's quite practical. I'm saying easy, but quite practical, because it doesn't matter even if there's a lot of disturbance, or even if one's emotions are very unstable. Also, we can think, may everybody else's emotions that they're feeling right now, may they come into my emotion. So even that emotional instability, you can make part of the practice. So that is, I think, how we can use the Lojong teachings. But I go back to the first point. It's most important to rely on the practices one is familiar with at the time of death. Okay.
But how we get the the point we imagine Amitabha for this?
You mean Amitabha Poa?
Yeah. So we imagine Amitabha, but when we do Amitabha practice, so we imagine Amitabha.
No, this would be
so
if one is
later.
No, it's best not to try to combine the two practices. If we have a lot of faith in and confidence in Amitabha, then use that practice. Don't mix them together. Use one or the other, but don't mix them together. If you have real confidence in Amitabha, either just through faith or because we're very, very accomplished in Poa, then we should that. Faith to Amitabha or Amitabha Poa. But keep it simple. It should be one or the other. Okay. So that's one.
I have
one A and one B. Oh, one C. I see. Okay.
I have one small question next about when High Lama or Rinpoche die and stay in the state after the dying in the meditation state for some days.
Yes.
It is what is called it is the compassion, or how is the mind, or why they stay there?
It is because they've not actually left their body. Their mind, the vital winds, which are the support of the mind, have gathered in the central channel. But because during life they were very used to this experience of the winds gathering in the central channel, they can remain in meditation in that state for quite a long time, even up to sometimes 3 or 4 days. And then the winds move out of the central channel and the mind leaves the body. But it's because they're used to this experience during lifetime that they remain in meditation at that time, as I say, as the winds have gathered into the central channel.
The wind from 21,000 winds.
Actually, there are a lot, yeah. But you don't need to worry about all 21,000. There are 3, anyway, that is another topic. Maybe not doing low jump.
Another topic, I think.
Yes, I think so.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you for the teachings. Yeah. My request is a little bit about the happiness, because I think it's not easier, but thinking of pain to get is a little bit easier, but thinking which happiness shall I give when I'm dying, and kind of that, why should anyone want when I die my happiness when I'm dying? This is a little bit difficult to understand in this giving and taking.
Sorry, it's difficult to think why should they have my happiness?
Which happiness should I give them when I die?
The best.
But I'm not happy when I die, maybe.
All that you've done during your life, all good things that you've done, you should give to them. The good things you've done, because they're the cause of future happiness. So if you're not feeling happy at that time, still you have all that accumulation of virtue that you've done, right down to small good things you've done during your life. So you always have something to give, even at that time. That's how it should be.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm not very convinced, but I can think it over.
Well,
that's the training, maybe.
Sorry?
That's the training, maybe.
Yes, but surely you've done some good things in your life, so you have something to give.
I might not think of it in difficult situations, and I don't know.
That is why we practice.
I have another question, a little bit offline, if possible, because where I sit, I see these fishes, and I always wonder what they stand for. So there are 2 fishes on the symbols.
Really, I have no idea.
You have no idea? And there are also 2 elephant teeth, kind of, also behind you. Really? You have no idea, okay, sorry.
No idea.
No. Okay, that has been it. Thank you.
Okay.
Lamala, thank you for your teachings. I really grasped a lot I really grasped a lot in these last 3-4 days. Actually, I have no question of my own. Yesterday, Sweta asked you a very profound question, and while going out, you said that today you would define it more elaborately. So maybe most of us would like to.
Okay.
Yesterday's question, which you could not answer due to lack of time.
Yes. This is to do with when does the ultimate bodhicitta actually arise? There's a question about this. Because in the Lojong teaching, we say, even as beginners, we're meditating ultimate bodhicitta. So the question is this the real ultimate bodhicitta? Because the ultimate bodhicitta is the primordial wisdom. And in the Mahayana, it says the actual primordial wisdom, which is the seeing of the Dharma Dhatu, the true nature of reality, this does not doesn't happen till the third of the 5 paths. Because according to the Mahayana, actually Hinayana, Mahayana and Vajrayana, our progress to enlightenment goes through 5 successive stages called the 5 paths. The first 2 paths are accumulation and application, but the third path is called the path of seeing or vision, because that is when we see for the first time directly the true nature of reality, or the Dhamma Dhatu. To see directly means without any dualism, without any concept of subject or object. In fact, without any label or concept. Just directly seeing, as it would be like seeing our own face for the first time and knowing it is our own face. So the real primordial wisdom is that. Once it arises, we've achieved the first noble level of a bodhisattva, and we cannot fall backwards in samsara. In terms of the 4 yogas of Mahamudra, which we mentioned earlier, this is the second yoga, which is called the unelaborated. Everything before that is the stage of one-pointedness, which is the same as the first 2 paths. So the real transcendental wisdom or primordial wisdom is that level, and that is very high, of course. So what does it mean then to meditate on ultimate bodhicitta or emptiness before then? It means to prepare ourselves. It means to align ourselves with it, to create the right space in our mind so that the real transcendental wisdom can arise. And we align ourselves with it by meditating on experience that resembles it. Is not the same, but resembles it. So, for instance, in the ultimate bodhicitta meditation, through analytical meditation, we get a conceptual idea of emptiness, like a mental picture. We call that in Tibetan a dunchi. That means like a mental object, or a mental object emptiness, or generic emptiness. It isn't the actual emptiness, it's like an incredibly subtle representation of it. And then by the settling meditation, we gain even more confidence and create the kind of connection for non-conceptualization when we reach the third path. So by analytical and settling, we are experiencing a resemblance of the definitive wisdom, without which the definitive wisdom will never arise later. So it's like we are almost, you say, preparing for it. But it isn't the definitive wisdom. Actually, in the Vajrayana, there is a saying, before the path of vision, the transcendental wisdom or the primordial wisdom comes and goes. Actually, it's a saying, it's not literally true, but it means we can have glimpses that are like it. We can have glimpses that are like the definitive emptiness. And so we can say, well, we're meditating emptiness, we're experiencing emptiness, but it isn't the real thing. There's still a kind of filter. It's still seen through a filter of language and concept. So it is a very, very subtle point, but it is very, very important, this. Because often people overrate their meditation experiences. They have an experience of stillness or temporary non-conceptualization and think, this is real emptiness, I've now achieved the noble levels. But it fades, whereas the real one doesn't fade.
It stays, it does not goes and comes like
This saying it comes and goes is like for this kind of preliminary picture of emptiness, so not the real one.
It's like imagination, or
not really imagination, it's experiential, but it doesn't decisively cut through the disturbing emotions. If it did, it would be the definitive one.
So is the mind faking it
not faking it.
Like faking it before it is making it?
No, not really. It's better than what we had before.
Okay, yeah. And one thing I also wanted to ask you, that I have full faith and confidence in the Lojong you taught us, and it is written in the book. But many things are written like, do not do this, do not do that, do not do this, do not do that.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of do's and don'ts in Buddhism.
Yeah, so
cease to do evil, learn to do good, purify your mind. That's 3 to start with.
Yeah.
And that is the teaching of the Buddha, as it said.
Yes. So at one point, isn't it like when we are listening to the teachings and we are contemplating, the mind says or the brain, whatever, it says it's too much, do not do, like closing in, it's like closing in the boundaries, like do not do this, do not do that, or like it should be free. It should be free without boundaries, and then you try to practice.
I think the trouble is with that is that we've already tried that.
Okay.
And where has it got us?
Yeah, true.
And as it says in the teachings, in fact, Shantideva, to reject the advice of the omniscient Buddha is like rejecting the advice of a skillful doctor. We're free, but it's probably not a good idea.
Yes, thank you.
But of course, it's a good point. Like, we mustn't be adolescent about this. Yes, the Buddha says don't do this. Shantideva says don't do that. Hey, we're free. If you don't like it, walk. But if you want to get somewhere in Dharma, it's good advice. So it's like that, you see, in the modern world is very adolescent. I would add this to the 5 degenerations. 6-1, we're all permanent teenagers. You can't tell me what to do. Let's grow up a little bit.
Okay, thank you. I'm satisfied with that.
That's good questions. They're all very good questions tonight. But I think now it is time to draw a veil on these proceedings. So thank you all for coming, and most importantly, it's not really my job, but I'm so happy that you all support His Holiness in his wishes and activities, and also the late and great and much lamented Shamarpa Rinpoche. So we should really think that we rededicate ourselves to that noble cause and try to share in their great activities, even by this small activity we've been engaged in here tonight. So let's dedicate our merit like tiny birds in the company of these great birds of the Dharma. Sunam di tamshi zikpani tobi nipi dhanam pamjin chikana chi bala tripayi sipi sole droa shu.